if I may draw a parallel with, say, for instance, migration from LIBOR to SOFR, people didn't want to do it. It's aggravation. And then eventually the industry said, oh, it's happening. It's flipping at this date. And then you've got to go. So from a sort of, just from a change management point of view, getting on board earlier, just eases the transition.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Hi, I am Kerry Wekelo, our COO of Actualize Consulting, and today I am joined by Paul Baram and Dean Ibbs from our UK office. Today, our topic is ISO 20022 adoption. In this podcast, we will present the key milestones along with the adoption timeline and review some of the major implications of the ISO 20022 message formats. We will also take a look at how organizations will be impacted, what you can do to best prepare, and how to realize the benefits associated with ISO 20022. Welcome, Paul and Dean. I'm excited to talk with you both today.
Hello.
Very happy to be here.
Okay, so Dean, I'm going to start asking you a few questions. What is ISO 20022 adoption and what's the overall timeline?
Yeah, so I think high level ISO 222 is a global standard for exchanging financial information. For users of the SWIFT network, ISO 222 will become mandatory in less than 2 years now. It's creeping up fast. Many other banks and financial institutions also are working on their own adoption timelines. The proposed transition is going to require fairly fundamental changes to the way in which most organizations operate. So that's going to be across things like master data management, cash and payment processes, configuration of systems, whether that's treasury management or ERPs. And successfully navigating those is going to require careful planning. There's going to be collaboration required across multiple stakeholders, and probably not what treasuries want to hear, but a potentially significant commitment of time and resources as well.
And with that, how do you even know if it applies to your organization?
So unlike some other regulations, this almost certainly applies to your organization. It's, as I mentioned, ISO 222 is going to become the global standard for data exchange between financial institutions. I saw something recently that SWIFT estimates that within 5 years, over 80% of high value payments by volume and 90% by value will use the new standard, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's driving this change?
I think it's been a long time coming. So although increasingly we live in a world that has developed global standards, communication protocols for lots of different purposes, that hasn't to date extended to financial transactions. Treasuries everywhere will, have some experience of the significant challenges posed by the lack of standardization for payment messages in particular, and the inefficiencies that generally leads to. I think one of the key aims of ISO 222 is to try and solve that long-standing problem.
Yeah, and we see that a lot more doing our treasury management system implementations as well. So will this new standard only apply to payment messages?
No, I think payment messages are probably the area of greater focus and of most interest, but the standard will apply across other types of messages as well. So bank reporting, notification, statement messages primarily, all of those as well will shift to the new standard. Okay.
And I think some of our listeners may be asking, can I continue to use the existing MT message formats?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but only for a period of time. So from a SWIFT perspective, a 2-year coexistence period actually began in March of this year, during which existing formats can continue to be used alongside the newer ISO 20022 formats. Similarly, then major banks and other financial institutions are defining their own adoption timelines and will eventually set migration deadlines. So short term, yes, long term, no. Migration will be required.
So when is that date? I mean, if it were me, I would be getting a little bit nervous that I might not have enough time.
Yeah, so the key date to keep in mind if your organization is already using the SWIFT network is November 2025. As I mentioned, just over a couple of years ago away now. Your organization by that stage will have to have fully migrated to the ISO 20022 format. And then alongside that, the payment market infrastructures, for the world's major currencies, other banks, financial institutions, as I said, are also aiming to fully adopt ISO 222 by this date. There will be some variations there, but that is the November 2025. That's the key date to keep in mind.
So with this, I'm assuming there's going to be enhanced data. What does that really mean?
Yeah, so one of the important aspects of the new standard is the ability to include richer and more structured data in the statement and payment messages, certainly relative to the existing format. That enhanced data has real potential to deliver significant benefits for corporates and financial institutions. A real upside to the migration, as well as the obligations and deadlines that we've already spoken about.
Right. And with any new standard, there's always new abbreviations. So I've seen LEI or POP. What do those stand for?
Yeah, so I think LEI is probably the one that's more familiar to our listeners. It refers to Legal Entity Identifier. It's typically an alphanumeric code, somewhere in the region of 20 digits, that's used globally to identify organizations involved in financial transactions. I think they really started to become more widely used a number of years ago with some other reporting regulations. POP is probably less familiar, so that refers to purpose of payment or purpose of payment code. So that's code that typically included on a payment message to indicate the nature of the transaction. So what does the transaction relate to? What category of transaction are we referring to? And the inclusion of both of these, so LEIs and POPs, will in time become mandatory for the ISO 20022 payment messages. So as I mentioned earlier, again, that's going to have implications for both the content of the metadata, but also the management and upkeep of that.
Great. Well, thanks, Dean, for setting us up for exactly what ISO 222 is. Now I'm going to shift over to Paul and talk about some of the more infrastructure-related items. So my first question, Paul, is what team should be involved in this adoption?
Is it okay if I just say all teams? And being slightly more serious, the point of this, and hopefully Dean's teed this up earlier, is there is a lot more data coming as part of this transition. And in a positive way, we need to understand how to use this data across all of your kind of corporate systems. So it's your finance teams as well as Treasury internally. It's understanding how that's going to kind of play in with what your suppliers may need to send you or what you may need to be sending out to your customers. It's really understanding. I mean, I like to talk about this in everything we do, but understanding the data model of what will come through these ISO standards is going to be important for everybody in the organization to understand.
Now, what about early adoption? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so again, Dean's teed it up nicely. We're in this interim status between where data is available but not mandatory. If I may draw a parallel with, say, for instance, migration from LIBOR to SOFR, people didn't want to do it. It's aggravation. And then eventually the industry said, oh, it's happening. It's flipping at this date, and then you've got to go. So from a sort of, just from a change management point of view, getting on board earlier, just eases the transition. But actually, if we try and sell the upside of this, there is more data. And if we can get on board of it, then we can start to realize some of the benefits of getting this new data. Dean referred to things like purpose of payment. This is something that's quite new and can be a pain, frankly, to try and populate. But the upside of that is you have a lot more clarity now over the type of payments you're making, and that can help you with, say, the way you account for these payments. So there really are some benefits that people could get after start to build this infrastructure out. before it then just happens upon them.
So how could I actually save money on the early adoption?
Well, money talks, doesn't it? So at its simplest, if you can get ahead of it, then perhaps it's money that doesn't have to go into kind of bank projects, when we will, inevitably have to stop, for argument's sake, for illustration's sake, go from one type of bank statement to another. So just in an external point of view, reducing those bank project charges. But if we think about it from an internal point of view, if we can get some of these pieces on board and integrated into our systems, we should be able to drop some of our internal costs, because maybe now we can straight through process payments. We don't have to kind of manually enhance them and touch them in the same way. Maybe we don't have to spend so much time trying to manually reconcile payments. And while that's not an external cost, we really do genuinely think it will be meaningful, to streamline what, frankly, a lot of customers have to spend a lot of manual time over.
Yeah, anytime you can reduce manual tasks is always a positive thing. So what else can our listeners benefit from the migration to ISO 20022?
So let's just pick out a few high-level points, and maybe Dean, you can add to the first couple. So, better data inherently is better, right? The more data you have, the better decision making you can make, right? So if you can have a lot more information on a payment, the metaphor that I was given early on in this was, in the old days or pre-ISO, we used to send postcards. And in this new world of ISO, think of it as highly structured, detailed emails. It's just more data, and that has to inherently be better. It should then, as well as aiding decisions, should also allow us to be more flexible operationally, right? So I like it off the data point. What else do you think, Dean?
Yeah, I think one of the key ones from my perspective is that making use of that additional data and information as you described, Paul. So, many of our listeners will know the pain of trying to reconcile large volumes of transactions, inconsistencies in terms of reporting and commentary and references that are provided today by lots of different banks. One of the benefits of the ISO 20022 move is that should be standardized to a greater degree. So that task of trying to identify what individual transactions relate to, if they match to your Treasury and ERP system, should become, in theory, much easier. I think another example of the way in which the structured nature of the data becomes useful is in, very hot topic, fraud prevention and detection. So one example is that the Bank of England plans to mandate inclusion of the LEIs, the legal entity identifiers, and the payment purpose code we discussed earlier on transactions related to property. So, typically those will be quite large value, quite important, potentially fast-moving payments. That greater structure, those requirements should then again make it more difficult for those to be fraudulent. And I think the final one I would probably add is, coming from my background, having previously worked for a treasury software vendor, I've seen firsthand the complexities that can arise when an organization needs to migrate between different connectivity or technology solutions, and the change in formats that often includes. So again, as the world moves more towards this global standard, then being able to change technology systems and connectivity systems should again become much easier, simply because there's more alignment from a messaging format or a standards perspective.
Yeah, those are all great benefits. So I guess the next question I would ask, what if my Treasury team can't support the new standard?
Sure. Well, frankly, that is one of those no is not an option questions, Kerry. So,
Right.
and any TMS that wants to be in business in 2026 needs to be part of that. And to be bluntly honest, they're already mostly engaged at a sort of build out level. The devil is in the details. So, what we'd say is go contact your TMS, get them to give you their roadmap, find out when the various product pieces are being deployed. But to give you an example, some of some of these things are there already. Certain banks can produce statements in the new kind of post ISO framework of CAMT 53s rather than say MT 940s. I know you love an acronym, Kerry. So
Right.
some of them are already in place and others to follow.
All right. Well, so if I have to do the adoption, what should my migration plan look like?
That's a great question. If we are many things at Actualize, and one of those is organized. We like process, we like templates, and we like to kind of standardize what we're doing. So let's rattle off a few things just to kind of get people thinking. So Dean started with data. So let's kind of talk about that. We need to think about our master data and what data model that exists. It should already have LEIs, but maybe it doesn't. And that if it doesn't already, then it's definitely going to have that. We also talked about purpose of payment codes. So understanding, and by the way, different countries around the world have different purpose of payment codes. God forbid we'd have a standard dictionary for that. Maybe our children will be talking about that in future episodes of podcasts. But for the meantime, we'll need to have country-specific messages. I'll stop at that point. Dean, do you want to add a couple of others?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've spent quite a bit of time, rightly so, talking about what organizations should be thinking about internally. But one of the things that I think is also worth highlighting is that, as well as generating this enhanced data yourselves, you're also going to be receiving it. So I think early consultation with your suppliers to understand how they'll provide that information to you. So, we might be talking about changes to information include on invoicing and how you'll process and understand that and include that in your own processes. Processes probably leads me quite nicely into a second point I had, which is around adaptation of your existing workflows and controls for ISO 222. So almost certainly that involves changes, as we've spoken about already, to technology workflows. So whether that's the systems you use to generate payment messages, to process bank reporting, but also wider than that. So Paul's touched already on data management, but not just data management in and of itself. What are the processes behind that? Who's responsible for maintaining that information? What additional things does that person perhaps have to do now, or what things should we include in our process that we didn't previously?
And then I guess if I can beat the previously last beaten drum, then my final point would be plan for when your TMS is going to change and make its product sort of enhancements. Factor that in on a practical level. I feel we also wouldn't really be doing ourselves any justice as Actualize, Kerry, if we didn't use the word KPI. So updating our KPIs would be definitely part of any kind of migration plan, because frankly, there will be new sets of KPIs available.
Yes, the key performance indicators. Absolutely. Well, I think we're about at time, but I did want to ask, how can Actualize help our listeners in this ISO 222 migration and adoption?
Well, I guess the point of this is to kind of bang the drum of knowledge, let people know what's out there. Hopefully we've given an indication this is something we're spending a lot of time thinking about. Come find us via our website, via LinkedIn, and we'd love to talk more.
as Paul said, it's something that we're spending a lot of time, understanding, and we're already starting to work with a number of clients in terms of preparing for the change. So, we spend a lot of time talking about the details of the migration and what's involved. But if you just feel you're in a position where you just need some help getting started, understanding specifically what it means for your organization, then for sure we'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah, Dean, you make me think. We kind of say it in a more structured way. Then there's probably three things I think that we're starting to see, right? One is readiness assessments. So one thing we can do very practically and formally is conduct a readiness assessment based on the TMS that clients using, based on their kind of existing profiles. If we do that readiness assessment, and we've done one or two, that gets us into roadmaps and the migration plan, just to sort of tie that back to together.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. And please let us know if we can help answer any of your questions.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.